Well, so institutionalized in our country. We get Christian holidays off in general. In New York, we get some Jewish holidays off as well, but that's not typical everywhere that you go. And we have people of different faiths living in every state and every city in this country. So I think that, again, it goes back to what are the messages that the federal government sends, what are the messages that different institutions send, and how these really do maintain these microaggressive encounters.
Yeah, and then just imagine, like, what is it like to be a person who doesn't identify as Christian, to hear these things all the time, and for it to be just so commonplace. I mean, I know I identify as an agnostic person, and I know that anytime somebody even says "God bless you" or "Get Merry Christmas," there's that assumption that that you would be religious. And what are the messages that are sent, or some of the messages that I received in telling people that I'm agnostic is that somehow I'm evil, or for not believing in Christianity or having a religion that I prescribe to. And I think that can really have a psychological toll on somebody if you hear these sorts of things over and over again.
Well, Kevin, this makes me think of the other scenario where this young woman is distancing herself from Muslims because of how she has been mistakenly identified in the past. You mentioned some of the negative stereotypes or remarks that you've received based on your identity as being agnostic. And I think that anything that goes out of the realm of being Christian, for the most part, there are a lot of negative associations with that. I think there always have been those negative associations for non-Christians in our country, but post 9/11, I think that was really heightened. I think it's hard to deny that it was heightened by that event, and how there was a real distancing from being Muslim.
I think you're right, especially there's multiple layers to what happened in the clip. When I think about the idea that not only did she have to kind of put a billboard out that said, "Wait, I'm not Muslim," she also looked to one of her fellow classmates to say, "No offense." So there's multiple offenses that are actually occurring there. The idea that you have to distance yourself, that there's something, the meta communication being that there's something bad or there's something wrong, or I would not want to be identified in that way even though it's not being brought up. And then the idea that you can judge just by looking at someone what their religious orientation would be.
Right. In fact, she was doing what is often done to her without really even acknowledging that she was committing the same kind of microaggression or assumption that she's felt so many times.
Let's move on to our final set of clips, which look at microaggressions based on intersectionality.
So how long does this presentation have to be?
I think the professor said 20 minutes.
Okay, so that means that we each have to talk for 4 minutes.
Yeah.
You have the computer.
Why did he have to be so loud? I could never date a woman like that. I mean, I like nice, quiet ladies like you, Lena.
Well, Lena isn't all ghetto like the girls at that table. I can't wait to see what that presentation is like.
It's as if I was supposed to be the ambassador for every black woman on earth. I was supposed to be able to account for the decibel levels of strangers at the next table. And I was supposed to be grateful that they deemed me civilized enough to work on their group project. Ugh.
That is so great that you want to be fathers. I mean, I've known you both for so long. I'm sure that it's going to go really well.
Thanks. I think we're both really excited.
You guys are gonna have kids?
Yeah, we've decided that we're finally ready to adopt.
Wow. Really? You guys are adopting? I mean, I hope you're ready and have done your homework. It's gonna be difficult without a mother figure. Have you looked into parenting classes or taken out books?
Plenty of women don't have a mother intuition. I think parenting's difficult no matter what.
I guess.
Well, I've known Jimmy since he was 8, and I'm sure he's going to be a great dad. So, what are you thinking of maybe adopting a mixed child so they look like both of you, or?
Nah, we just want a healthy child.
Well, this two daddy thing's gonna be hard enough for your kid to get. You might as well make the race thing a little easier to handle.
So in both of these scenarios, we were able to see microaggressions based on intersecting identities. There were some intersections based on race, gender, sexual orientation, for example. So what are some of your thoughts on those?
Well, I know that, with the clip involving the black women and the white man making a statement of why they gotta be so loud, I think that really is an intersection of both their race and their gender, where he's making assumption of all black women as being loud and perhaps even stereotyping them as being uneducated. There were some comments about what kind of presentation they were going to have. And so I think, we need to realize, as Nicole, what you had mentioned earlier, that it's not just on one identity that you're being microaggressed, that most of the time it has to do with more than one thing. Perhaps there might be one identity that might be more present or more noticeable, but it's the intersections that's really being microaggressed against.
And I think it's interesting that in that clip, the recipient of the microaggressive experience was really the black group member who was participating, and the expectation in some ways that she's the exception to the rule, or that she's a spokeswoman, like, why are they loud? It's almost a question as if she's supposed to answer that in some way. And then it was further, I thought, microaggressive for sure, the idea that, well, I would date someone like you, implying that that's a privilege for her to be looked at affirming by a white male.
Yeah, exactly. We saw how her cultural values or the communication styles of African Americans was pathologized in this video. And not just that, but that it was taken to the extent that based on how they were communicating with each other was an indication of their intellectual ability. So this description of intelligence that we find African Americans are often described to be of lower intelligence. The group member made the comment, well, it'll be interesting to see how that presentation goes, sort of indicating that it's probably not going to be as of high quality as theirs, just because of the way that they were interacting with one another. So what do you think about that other scenario involving the interracial gay couple?
Well, I think it definitely speaks to intersectionalities. They are interracial, so there's the race issue coming up, the fact that they're gay men, some of the comments that some of their friends or acquaintances made about two gay men raising a child, so that is based on gender. So there's just a lot of going on. I think in this scenario, it really describes those micro insults. We've described the micro assaults and the micro invalidations, but the micro insults, so they're making these blanket statements about men raising babies, and then these blanket statements about whether this child is going to be confused or have a difficult time in life because they were being raised by two dads, and that can be really insulting. So micro insults being these statements or behaviors that communicate disdain or disgust or bias, and so I think that definitely is something that stood out to me.
I think it really does, Kevin. In fact, it really harkens back to the earlier clip we watched with the nanny example, where the idea that a family looks a certain way, and that in some way this child is going to be in an abnormal or not well settled environment because of the fact that it's two dads, it has two dads, or the fact that it has interracial family roots, and it's really insulting. This idea that it can't be a happy, healthy home, and that there's something inherent to watch out for.
It also speaks to this hierarchy of oppressions that was sort of alluded to by the woman who said, well, they're going to have enough to deal with by having two gay dads, so why don't you have a child that at least looks like you? And what does that communicate? That it's worse to be gay, or it's worse to be multiracial? There's a lot embedded in that as well.
And I think something that we saw throughout the clips too was the idea that the perpetrator of microaggressions can be any means of, relation or closeness. So in this instance, this is a childhood friend, and I think oftentimes that can happen where it's a friend or where it's someone that you are close to, whether it's a family member, and it can make it even more difficult to confront because there's this mixed feeling of, this is someone I'm close to, this is someone that I trust, but yet this is very microaggressive experience that I'm having.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that this definitely demonstrated microaggressions that can happen in more of a friendly environment. We've seen throughout this entire video microaggressions that might happen in the workplace with strangers and so forth. And I think that's just important for us to see, and I hope that the video helped to convey microaggressions in all contexts, or at least a good sample of various contexts. Do you all have any thoughts in general about just the video or the videos that we had seen and just other things that you think might be important for us to add?
Well, I think that given the breadth of microaggressive encounters that were demonstrated throughout the video, that it's important for people to take home the message that microaggressions are very nuanced. That what we spoke about today, what we viewed in the videos, is just a subset of the experiences that marginalized people have to go through in their daily lives, and that there are other marginalized groups that weren't even included in these groups. And so it's sort of taking this idea, this phenomena of microaggression, and thinking about it in a more nuanced way, thinking about how we come across as people, the type of ideals that we espouse, and how those can be communicated in a microaggressive way. So I think that for me, that's really what stood out in today's conversation.
Part of it is sitting here with how heavy those experiences are, and especially for people who are looking at increasing awareness and understanding more about this phenomenon. It really sits with you, and I think that's part of what you'll notice in my silence, is just really taking it in the enormity of how often, how common, how frequent, microaggressions occur. They're not addressed. And thinking as my role, what part do I play in this? And hoping that this is just a discussion, a part of the discussion that gets continued beyond what we're sitting here talking about today. And I know that there's a lot of exciting research that's being done, and there are classroom discussions and hopefully workplace discussions that are starting to occur about microaggressions. But I have to agree with both of you. It's still very nuanced. There's still so much for us to know and understand about how we can really do something different to continue to combat microaggressions so that they are not occurring as often, as frequent, and so that we really see less disparities and more change.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the research and the disparities as well, because there has been this increase in research that's found that microaggressions have a negative influence on things like mental health and depression and self-esteem, as well as even physical health. That there have been some studies that have found that people who experience more microaggressions might exhibit more physical health symptoms. And I think, again, like what I'd mentioned before, it's not just that we think it's important for us to just recognize that microaggressions exist, but we also need to realize that they do have a detrimental impact on people's lives. And when people's physical health and their mental health are at stake, I think it becomes a more serious issue that we need to address. I also think what was interesting is the fact that we use these actors and they have these multiple roles, and it just got me to realize that people can be both the perpetrator and victims or recipients of microaggressions at any time. Some instances they might have powerful or privileged identities, other instances they may be more marginalized. And so we need to realize that not everybody is a perpetrator because you're white or because you're a man, that you're always going to be a perpetrator. Perhaps you have another identity in which you might be the recipient of these microaggressions as well. And so it's really important for us to acknowledge both of our privileged and powerful identities as well as our marginalized identities. And I guess the last thing I just want to mention is just this, what are some of these implications for psychology? We as clinicians or as researchers or as educators need to realize that our clients and our students may experience microaggressions, whether it's in their everyday lives, but perhaps even in therapy sessions, in the classrooms. We need to model effective ways of coping with microaggressions, acknowledging microaggressions. We need to really allow our clients and our students to feel validated when they experience microaggressions. I think what we're finding is that a lot of times microaggressions go unnoticed, but hopefully a video like this and other sorts of trainings that people might take or become involved in, that this might help people to at least start that dialogue of what, how we can combat these microaggressions to help eliminate some of these disparities and these psychological hardships that many people experience. So thank you so much for being a part of this video. It was a pleasure having this discussion with you, and I hope that everybody enjoyed everything that we had to talk about today, and that you continue to further these discussions in your classroom settings, in your family and friendships, and in other aspects of your lives. Thank you very much.